Pierre Gasly has the fear of a race ban for the next 7 months in Formula 1. The Frenchman currently has 10 penalty points on his licence, the first of which will expire next May. At 12, of course, a suspension for one race will begin. And with his imminent switch to Alpine, there is a question that's arising around the pit lane at the moment, whether the AlphaTauri driver should perhaps look to try and rack up those last 2 penalty points in Brazil and face that race ban for just the final race of the season and his last driver AlphaTauri before making the switch to Alpine. The penalty points system in F1 works this way. If a driver accumulates 12 penalty points on his licence within 12 months, he is suspended for a race. 12 months after the penalty points have been incurred, it expires again. Penalties are awarded on the basis of violations and are often accompanied by other penalties such as time or grid penalties. A minor offence, such as going wide too often for example, usually costs a driver 1 point on his licence. A more serious offence, such as ignoring yellow flags or causing a crash, will probably give you 2 penalty points on your licence. Gasly has racked up quite a few penalty points in the last few races, bringing his total, as I said earlier, to 10. In Japan, for example, he received 2 penalty points for speeding under a red flag. And at the United States Grand Prix in Austin, Texas, he added another 2 penalty points to his licence for falling too far behind the safety car. And 1 penalty point was picked up in Mexico for forcing Lance Stroll off the track. The trouble for the 26-year-old driver, however, is that his first penalty points will only expire on May the 22nd, 2023, which means that he can collect a maximum of 1 penalty point in the last 2 races of the year and then the first 7 races of next year before he will get a ban. It's not impossible, but a mistake could easily be made by the French driver. The current penalty point system was introduced in Formula 1 in 2014, and since then, no driver has actually accumulated 12 points in 12 months. Gasly is set to make his switch to Alpine at the end of this year, which means that he will be right on the edge of serving a race ban for the first 7 months at his new employer. This raises the question of whether or not it would be better for him to run into 2 penalty points in Brazil perhaps, so that he is suspended for Abu Dhabi, but at least his licence will then be clean when he joins Alpine. It will allow him to start next season with a clean slate, and Otmar Szafnauer has already joked the Alpine boss about perhaps a tactical error in the last few weekends of the season, and possibly Interlagos bringing about those 2 penalty points. Although we have to stress that Szafnauer is saying this with a bit of tongue-in-cheek rather than being sincere about it. Still, it's not such a bad idea at all for Gasly. The Frenchman is of course not going to intentionally cause a crash though. Besides the safety of his colleagues, the stewards will undoubtedly be unhappy about anything like that. But cutting a certain corner too often or falling back a little too far behind a safety car, and that will do no harm whatsoever to his opportunity to pick up 2 more points in Brazil on his licence. It is worth considering, although of course you never know how the race management would react to this, but it's certainly one that will perhaps be in the French driver's mind as he goes into these last 2 races of the season. On the other hand, rules are rules and they're for a reason, so even if the race management sees that the Frenchman is trying to gain these 2 extra penalty points, the penalties will follow and therefore he will be suspended for that 1 race with AlphaTauri at the end of the year. With 2 races to go and his team 9th in the Constructors' table, AlphaTauri will want to see maximum points from Gasly as they can still potentially reach P6 in the Constructors' standings before the end of this season. So they will want to see Gasly push for as many points as possible in the final 2 races of the season, but it's worth just keeping an eye on how the Frenchman conducts himself in Brazil this coming weekend.